Hello everybody, today we're going to be ranking every wide receiver room in the NFL for the upcoming 2023 NFL season. Let's dive right into it. We are going to be ranking every team by tier and then also sorting them within the tiers. Starting out with the New Orleans Saints, I think they are a team that does need to prove it. Obviously, Michael Thomas is the big piece of that, really has not been able to stay healthy. Love what Chris Olave did as a rookie, definitely think he can build on that in his sophomore season. They have some nice pieces below that as well. Raheed Shaheed had a pretty nice rookie season, had some explosive plays, still had Traquan Smith and a couple of other players there, A.T. Perry as well, somebody that I think could develop into a nice receiver. Ultimately, I do think that they do have to prove that they are going to be a consistent unit. Michael Thomas is the biggest piece of that, absolutely. Next up, the Miami Dolphins. I think they are absolutely one of the elite wide receiver rooms in the NFL. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, those two alone, both top 15 wide receivers in the NFL. Some of the fastest guys also in the entire league. Just so difficult to defend. I definitely think that, they have some nice depth as well. Cedric Wilson, Braxton Berrios, they have chosen Anderson as well. So definitely think that they have the high-end talent to be in that elite tier, but they also have some nice depth as well. And definitely think they are going to be, a top 5 wide receiver room in the 2023 NFL season. For the Baltimore Ravens, definitely think that they have to prove it here. I am going to have them ranked above the Saints. They have Rashad Bateman. They drafted Zay Flowers, you get Odell Beckham. It's all about, are those guys able to gel? Are they able to stay healthy and really be able to contribute? Lamar Jackson really hasn't had good wide receivers at any point in his career. Zay Flowers, I think, has a nice skill set to be a nice, number 2 wide receiver. Odell Beckham has fought injuries, as has Rashad Bateman. So it's all about getting the most out of those guys. Those 3 players are really good, but they also do have a couple of other players, James Prochet, Devin Duvernay, Nelson Aguilar. I think they have some pretty good depth. It's just going to be about getting the most out of those players because they have the talent to really kind of become a good passing offense. It's all about, can they do that? The Cincinnati Bengals, I think, absolutely have one of the best wide receiver trios in the NFL, if not the best. I do have them ranked above the Dolphins here because Tyler Boyd just adds that third wide receiver element that is so important. Jamar Chase is a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. I think you could make a real argument that T. Higgins is the best wide receiver 2 in the NFL, and he would be a wide receiver 1 on most teams. I certainly think so. He's a top 15 to maybe even 10 wide receiver. Tyler Boyd's a great slot receiver. They drafted Charlie Jones. They drafted Andre Josephus as well. They have Trenton Irwin. Definitely one of the best wide receiver rooms in the NFL. Really don't think there's any debate to that at all. Definitely a top unit. The Denver Broncos up next. I'm going to put them right in between the Ravens and the Saints here. Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick coming back from injury, Jerry Jeudy. There's been rumors about Jeudy and Sutton both being traded this offseason. Ultimately, they are still on the roster here. They drafted Marvin Mims. You have some pieces there, KJ Hamler, Marquez Callaway as well. There's some depth there. It's all about, Jerry Jeudy. Are you able to get the most out of him? He had a productive season last year quietly, but Russell Wilson's going to be throwing him the ball. I just think that they need to prove that they're going to be a consistent, strong unit. Wouldn't surprise me if one of Jeudy or Sutton leaves by the end of the year, but for this upcoming season, I think they have the talent. It's just about putting those pieces together and proving that they are going to be a really good wide receiver unit. The New York Giants, I do have some big concerns. Good luck to Daniel Jones. They made it work last year, and I think that, perhaps this is a better unit than they had, but overall, still just not talented at that wide receiver room. You've got Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell. Jalen Hyatt at least adds a speed and deep threat element to this offense that they didn't necessarily have last year. You have Jamison Crowder, Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson. It's a very crowded wide receiver room. There's a lot of bodies there, but I just don't think there's a lot of difference makers. I think you've got a number of quality wide receiver 3s, maybe wide receiver 2s if you're really stretching it, but they definitely do not have a dominant wide receiver 1 on this roster. I just don't think that this passing game is ever going to be really electric with Daniel Jones throwing to this group of wide receivers. For the Minnesota Vikings, I'm going to go with really good. Justin Jefferson is the best wide receiver in the NFL. I don't think that that is a bold statement at all. Really love what he does, and he definitely brings this group up. You've got KJ Osborne. You've got Jordan Addison, who they drafted as well. You have Jalen Reagor, as well as having Jalen Naylor as well. Not really guys that I think are going to be capable NFL starters if they're asked to step into that role. Osborne is a perfectly fine wide receiver 3. If you can get some really good production out of Jordan Addison year 1, definitely think that this could be a very good unit. I mean, ultimately, I do think that they are one of the better units in the NFL. They're very good, but I just don't think that they have, that wide receiver 2 that's really dominant. Maybe that turns out to be Jordan Addison, but I just have tempered expectations for him. I do think the depth is a bit limited for the Vikings as well. So going to put them at that really good tier. Justin Jefferson absolutely boosts that up, and I just want to say he is the best wide receiver in the NFL. The LA Rams were a really hard group to rank. I'm going to put them in good. Cooper Kupp single-handedly puts them there. Otherwise, they would probably be in the very bottom tier. They have Ben Skoranek, as well as a couple of other just guys there. Van Jefferson, Puka Nacua, who they just drafted, Tutu Atwell. Nobody that really scares the defense at all, besides Cooper Kupp, who is a top 7 wide receiver in the NFL. Obviously had that amazing season just 2 years ago. Was injured a bit this past season, so it's just going to be about how good Cooper Kupp really is for you. I think if he misses time, this is a terrible wide receiver group. If he's not dominant, it's a terrible wide receiver group, but him alone, as one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, he keeps them in that good tier. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers next, I'm going to put them in an amazing unit. You've got Mike Evans, you've got Chris Godwin, you've got Russell Gage, some other players in there as well. I think, Trey Palmer, Raheem Jarrett could be contributors as well. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, when they're both healthy, playing, they are very, very good wide receivers. They could certainly make a case to be in this elite unit when they're fully healthy, when they're in their primes. Mike Evans is getting a bit older. Chris Godwin has dealt with some injuries. You don't have Tom Brady throwing you the ball anymore. I don't expect them to have necessarily the same outrageous production that they've had over their time with Tom Brady as the quarterback, but I certainly think they are very good players. Mike Evans especially has been underrated for a very long time, just consistently churns out 1,000-yard seasons, so definitely like the Buccaneers unit here, but I am just going to put them a step below that truly elite tier. The Lions I had a very hard time with as well. I think they have to prove it. Amon-Ra St. Brown continues to be one of the most underrated players in the NFL, really at any position, I think. He is so good at moving the chains on third down, being a consistent weapon for Jared Goff, and I just absolutely love how he plays the game. Now, the rest of the wide receiver room, when I was kind of going through this exercise, I was pretty disappointed in the other guys that they had. Josh Reynolds, Marvin Jones on a second stint with the Lions. You've got Khalif Raymond, Trinity Benson, Tom Kennedy. None of those guys are really scary. I wish they would have addressed the wide receiver position in the draft. I know Jahmyr Gibbs is probably going to take a lot of receiving targets there, but we're just counting wide receivers, and I am not super impressed with this group. Amon-Ra St. Brown does push this group up a bit, but he's not a top 5 wide receiver like Cooper Kupp, and so I am just going to put them down a tier a little bit. If Amon-Ra St. Brown does go down, I have some serious concerns about this receiver room, so I am just going to keep them in that have-to-prove-it tier. The Chicago Bears, I think, do have a good wide receiver room, and that is great for them. They had one of the worst units I've ever seen last year. You go out, you get DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney gets healthy. Chase Claypool, I didn't love the trade by any means, but he's definitely got some upside there. You still have Velus Jones, you have Equanimous St. Brown, you drafted Tyler Scott, who has kind of some speed to really give that deep threat element to this offense. Getting DJ Moore, he's a true dominant wide receiver 1. I think he's a fringe top 10 wide receiver. You get him as your wide receiver 1, everything just kind of falls nicely into place. Darnell Mooney is a good wide receiver 2. Chase Claypool is a good wide receiver 3. All things considered, I think Tyler Scott or one of those other guys can step in and be a nice depth contributor as well. So I think the Bears deserve a lot of credit for how much they've improved their wide receiver room. Obviously, it took trading out of the first pick to do so, but definitely think they are a much improved unit, and they are a good wide receiver room. The San Francisco 49ers, I'm going to go with an amazing unit here. Deebo Samuel kind of played a hybrid wide receiver running back role for them last year. Did have a bit of a down season when it came to the receiving numbers, but Brandon Ayuk, one of the better wide receiver 2s in the NFL for sure. You have Jawan Jennings, Ray McLeod, Danny Gray, some of those guys there that could potentially step in. I don't love their depth necessarily. It's perfectly fine. There's no real cause for major concern, but I do think Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk really kind of highlight this wide receiver room. The two of them are one of the better duos in the NFL, and they're definitely an amazing wide receiver unit, just one step below that elite tier. Speaking of elite tier, I have the Philadelphia Eagles here slotting in right between the Bengals and the Dolphins. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, one of the best duos in the NFL. Perhaps only second to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in my mind. Quez Watkins, they have Zacchaeus as well, who they got from the Falcons. I just think that this wide receiver room is really, really good. And I mean, A.J. Brown proved himself to be a dominant wide receiver one, a top 7 or so wide receiver in the NFL. Devontae Smith deserves a ton of credit. I think he is definitely a top 3 wide receiver 2 in the NFL, would be a wide receiver 1 on a lot of teams, just like we said for T. Higgins. This is a absolutely elite room, and I think they showed that last year. They are an absolute nightmare for defensive coordinators to kind of scheme against and for corners to match up against. The Las Vegas Raiders next, gonna go with an amazing unit. I have them above the Buccaneers and the 49ers a little bit there. For the Raiders, I just think that Davante Adams really carries this group. He is still one of the best receivers in the NFL, definitely has all of the talent in the world, the best route runner in the NFL in my opinion as well. His release package is just so dominant. Hunter Renfrow, a very solid wide receiver 2. He's very good when it comes to moving the chains. I really liked the Jacoby Myers signing as well. Thought that he was a little bit underrated in New England. Didn't want any team to sign him to any crazy contract, but I thought the Raiders got solid money for him. He ended up getting very similar money to what the Patriots gave Juju, and I think Jacoby Myers is a better player. They also drafted Trey Tucker, which was a bit early for me. They have Phillip Dorsett, so they've got some good players. Really like that big 3 though of Adams, Renfrow, and Jacoby Myers. Think that they can be a really solid 1, 2, 3, and they are one of the better units in the NFL because of that. Moving on, the Green Bay Packers, a group that I still have my concerns about. I do think that I do believe in Christian Watson to really turn into a very solid wide receiver in the NFL. I thought he showed a lot of flashes, being a very dynamic player, somebody that can kind of take the top off a defense and really be a solid contributor. I liked Romeo Doubs as well. I thought that he played a very important role. He needs to cut down on the drops a little bit, but definitely has a role in the NFL and definitely think he could be a solid, wide receiver 3. They drafted Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks as well as Grant DuBose. They did invest in that wide receiver room, but it was pretty bare after Lazard and Cobb left. So, I think they just have a lot to prove. I have my concerns about them. I like Watson, but I'm not sure he's a true dominant wide receiver 1 yet. I like Romeo Doubs. Don't think he's really, really kind of set in that role as a wide receiver 2. And there's just a lot of uncertainty beyond that. I do have my concerns. Wish they did a little bit more to provide for Jordan Love when it came to the wide receiver room. The Commanders are a team that I do think has a little bit of an underrated wide receiver room. I think it's a very good room. Terry McLaurin continues to be one of the more underrated receivers in the NFL. Just a very, very good player. I liked Jahan Dotson a lot in his rookie season. I thought he showed some really nice flashes when he was, fully healthy, playing with a good quarterback. So I definitely think that, maybe Sam Howell doesn't get the most out of him this year, but I do think he's a very talented player. You've got Curtis Samuel, who's a nice yak player. You also have, De'Ami Brown, who I really liked coming out of North Carolina. You have Dax Milne, who was Zach Wilson's number 1 wide receiver at BYU. So I just like what they have on this roster. It's not groundbreaking. It's not one of the best units in the NFL, but McLaurin and Dotson, Curtis Samuel, I think they all have very defined roles, and it's a very solid unit. The Arizona Cardinals, another unit that is a bit tough to rank with kind of all the speculation about DeAndre Hopkins, if he's going to play for the Cardinals. Obviously, when Hopkins is healthy, he's one of the better receivers in the league. You've got Hollywood Brown, who had some pretty nice games last year. He did kind of get banged up. Rondale Moore maybe hasn't showed exactly what they had hoped for when they drafted him out of Purdue, but still definitely think he has a role as a yak player. Michael Wilson was a really solid draft pick. He probably would have been drafted a lot higher without the injury concerns. You have Zach Pascal, who you got from the Eagles as well. It's a nice, solid room. It's all about DeAndre Hopkins staying on the field, staying motivated, and really kind of competing for the Cardinals this year. The Steelers I have slotting in right after the Commanders as well. For the Steelers, I think George Pickens is going to develop into a nice wide receiver 1. Him and Pickett really do have a good connection. If you haven't seen my Kenny Pickett video, please go ahead and check that out. But with Pickens, definitely think he has some good ability being that back shoulder contested catch wide receiver. Deontay Johnson does need to be more consistent with his hands, but when he catches it, he's a very dangerous player, good route runner. You've also got Allen Robinson, not in his prime, but still a good player. Calvin Austin, Miles Boykin, Anthony Miller, just some other depth pieces that maybe have some juice here and there. I don't think the Steelers unit is, super top heavy, but I really kind of like the depth. I think they do go 3 or 4 deep with quality players. Maybe don't have that dominant receiver 1, but I am expecting Pickens to take a major step up in year 2. For the Buffalo Bills, I'm going with really good. This is Stephon Diggs really kind of carrying this, much like Justin Jefferson is carrying the Vikings here. I don't think Gabe Davis is kind of this dominant player. He's very streaky. He's a deep threat. He's somebody that will go through spurts where he has a 3-touchdown game and maybe 200 yards, and then he's quiet for the next 3 games, really not getting a catch, doing nothing. So, there's just not a lot of consistency there. You got Khalil Shakir, you got Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy. There's some decent depth there, but Stephon Diggs is really kind of what makes this a really good unit. One of the better receivers in the league for sure. For the Falcons, I do definitely have my concerns. Them and the Packers, I think, are very similar. Drake London is, I think, equivalent to Christian Watson. I do expect him to turn into a really quality player. Behind Drake London, you've got Mac Hollins, who had some nice moments for the Raiders, but still as the wide receiver 2, that's a bit concerning. Scotty Miller, Kaderil Hodge, Penny Hart. There's just not a lot of depth at this wide receiver position. I do have my concerns over how good they can really be. If Drake London goes down, this is just a brutal unit. So, I do definitely have my concerns. I like Romeo Doubs a little bit more than Mac Hollins, so I am going to put the Packers above them. So, not one of the better units in the NFL by any means, and I definitely think that, they're one injury away from being one of the worst units in the NFL. The Seahawks, I think, absolutely have turned themselves into one of the elite wide receiver units in the NFL. You've got your ex-wide receiver in DK Metcalf, somebody that can be a contested catch ball winner. He can be a true deep threat with that size-speed combination. Tyler Lockett is your ideal Z receiver. He can stretch the field, but he's also very good when it comes to deep routes. He's just, a very solid number 2 wide receiver. And then you draft Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think he's going to fit so perfectly in the slot. He's just somebody that can move the chains really effectively, just going to be always open. And the defenses really can't, cue in on one player. You're going to have to pick your poison with Metcalf, Lockett, and Smith-Njigba, and I think they are going to be one of the best units in the NFL. For the New England Patriots, I have some serious concerns. Good luck to Mr. Mac Jones. They weren't really surrounding him with a lot of talent last year, and I think they probably just got a worse wide receiver room now. You have Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't think he's an amazing player. He did have over 1,000 yards with Patrick Mahomes, but Mahomes makes every wide receiver look really good. And, I don't think that's really much of an upgrade over Jacoby Myers. You have Devontae Parker, Tyquan Thornton, Kayshon Boutte, who they drafted, Kendrick Bourne. Just none of these guys really inspire any confidence in me. Mac Jones needs a lot more help if the Patriots expect to be competitive in the AFC East this year. For the Cleveland Browns, I am going to put them in the good tier. I really like what they've done with their wide receiver room, and I definitely think it could go a little bit higher than this. Amari Cooper is a very solid wide receiver 1. I think he's a very, very good route runner, but, just not necessarily somebody that I would consider a top 10 wide receiver in the league. You've got Donovan Peoples-Jones, Elijah Moore. Both of those guys have shown some really nice flashes, but have yet to really consistently put it together over the course of a season. And then you brought in, Cedric Tillman as well. I thought he was a really solid wide receiver. He can give you some ball winning ability. So, they have some other depth pieces there. Marquise Goodwin, David Bell, but I think really, this is a solid wide receiver group. I could certainly see them climbing a bit higher, but I'm just not sure that they have, the same juice as some of the other teams in this league. For the Houston Texans, they still remain one of the worst in the NFL. They did try to add to it. You get John Mechie back, thankfully, from, his cancer diagnosis. So happy that he's going to be able to get playing this year. But you also have Robert Woods. Think he's pretty much on the tail end of his career. Nico Collins is fine, but he's pretty much what he is at this point. Tank Dell, you brought in. CJ Stroud really wanted to play with him. He has absolutely no size, but he can separate, and, maybe he turns into something. Noah Brown, also another option. So they brought in some depth. I think it's, a more talented room than they had last year by a long shot, but I still definitely think that, they lack a true ball winner. They lack somebody that can really take the top off the defense and be a dominant wide receiver 1 for them. This might be a bit of a hot take, but I think the Chiefs wide receivers are really not that good. I have my concerns about them. They really aren't very talented. You have Marquez Valdes-Scantling, you have Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, they drafted Rashee Rice, Richie James. Nobody in this group scares you at all. If this was, Daniel Jones throwing them the ball, I would fully expect this to be one of the worst passing offenses in the NFL. No disrespect to Daniel Jones, but he's not Patrick Mahomes. And that's just kind of where I am with this Chiefs wide receiver room. Obviously, Travis Kelce is a receiving threat for them, but You lose Juju, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but you also lose Mecole Hardman. There's just not a lot of guys on this roster for the Chiefs when it comes to the wide receiver room that are really super exciting to me. Maybe Sky Moore takes that step in year 2. MVS is a little inconsistent, but maybe he becomes a really solid receiver. Kadarius Toney, showed some nice flashes at the end of last year. I have no doubts that the Chiefs will still be very successful with this wide receiver room, but when it comes to the pure talent of these players, not sure it's one of the better units in the NFL. Also need to go ahead and flip this. I do have the 49ers above the Buccaneers, but for the Dallas Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb, definitely a wide receiver 1. He's really kind of proven his worth over the past couple of years. You bring in Brandon Cooks. You already have Michael Gallup, Jalen Tolbert, Kevontae Turpin. This is a very well-rounded wide receiver room. You've got the talent at the top with Lamb. Brandon Cooks turns out 1,000-yard seasons. This was probably the most talented quarterback he's played with in a while. So definitely some really, really good players all across the board. Michael Gallup, another year removed from the ACL injury. So, I think this is an amazing wide receiver unit. I definitely think that when it comes to pure wide receivers, Dak Prescott's going to be very happy with this unit. For the Chargers, I am going to put them actually right above the Cowboys here. They are just a unit that has a lot of proven commodities. You have Keenan Allen, one of the better receivers in the NFL for a long time. Now, it's about injuries. Can he stay healthy? Is he going to be, a really, really good wide receiver in 2023? That's still yet to be determined. Mike Williams has also dealt with injuries, but he's a very good wide receiver too when he plays. You draft Quentin Johnston to really kind of add that speed threat to this offense that they have desperately needed. The ability to win downfield for Justin Herbert is going to be crucially important in kind of opening up this offense. So definitely like some of the changes they've made. You also have Josh Palmer, Jalen Guyton. I just think this is a very, very good unit for the Chargers, and I like what they have done to really kind of upgrade this room this season with Quentin Johnston. For the Jets, I do think they're going to have to prove it. I really expect Garrett Wilson to take a big step in year 2. I think he is going to be a dominant wide receiver 1, and with Aaron Rodgers at the helm, I really expect him to have a great season. This is absolutely no indication of my thoughts on him, because I definitely think he's going to be a great player. You bring in Mecole Hardman to bring some speed elements there. You have Allen Lazard, who I am not a big fan of. Don't really love that signing, but I get it. It's for Aaron Rodgers. Same thing with Randall Cobb. And then with that there, you also have Corey Davis. Denzel Mims is still somehow on this team. This is a talented group. You did lose Elijah Moore. You don't have, that necessarily really, really good wide receiver 2 on the roster. Maybe Mecole Hardman turns into that. Maybe you get some production out of some of those other guys that, we mentioned with Lazard or Corey Davis. But, I do have, a little bit of concerns of them just kind of getting consistent wide receiver play out of this entire unit. I think Garrett Wilson is going to be very good. I could totally understand pushing the Jets up another tier. When it comes to their well-roundedness as an entire wide receiver room, I do think there is just a little bit lacking there. Garrett Wilson, though, amazing player. I think he's going to be a huge player for the Jets in 2023. The Carolina Panthers next. I do have my concerns for the Panthers. I think that, they've done a pretty good job kind of recuperating the loss of DJ Moore, but there's still going to be some problems in replacing that caliber of player. You bring in Adam Thielen, you bring in DJ Chark. Both of those guys have had some serious injury issues, so you can't necessarily rely on them to be playing for 17 games. Terrace Marshall hasn't really shown a whole lot. Jonathan Mingo, you did draft. Hopefully he turns into a great player. He has the traits to absolutely do so. You have Laviska Shenault, really hasn't developed. So I think there's just a lot of uncertainty in this room. If they all stay healthy and really kind of develop as they should, this could be a great unit. But I just don't want to bet on that when, kind of history has told us otherwise with some of these guys with their injuries and maybe, not betting on Terrace Marshall or Laviska Shenault to really reach that ceiling that they were drafted to kind of potentially reach. I think that they have some talent here. I do think 1 or 2 of these guys is going to become pretty good players, but I do have my concerns. The Titans, I hate to say it, they have the worst wide receiver room in the NFL in my opinion. Treylon Burks showed some pretty good stuff as a rookie. He was injured a little bit, but I thought he showed some really nice things. He's a nice yak monster. I think he has some ability to be a contested catch weapon as well, but behind him is just a train wreck. You have Nick Westbrook-Ikine, you have Kyle Phillips, Chris Moore, Racey McMath, absolutely none of those guys scare you as a defensive coordinator. You put your number 1 corner on Treylon Burks, you shift the coverage to him, and you say, make Nick Westbrook-Ikine beat me. Make Kyle Phillips beat me. Make Chris Moore beat me. And I just don't think that they can. And I have some serious concerns about the Titans for that there. For the Colts, I do have my concerns, but I do think that they are still a very solid unit. I have them kind of as the top team in this tier. Michael Pittman has had some good games. I don't think he's consistently been a really dominant weapon like I think maybe the Colts had hoped he had turned into there, but I do like some of the other players that they have as well. Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, they drafted. Those three are very solid. I don't think any of them are dominant wide receivers. I don't think they've proven to be that at this point. Behind them, there's just not much of anything. Isaiah McKenzie, nothing really else of note. So I just think that this unit is solid. All three of the starters, I think, will be pretty decent, but there's just not much depth behind it, and I don't think they have a dominant wide receiver one. Finally, for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think they have a really good room. Calvin Ridley coming back from his suspension. When we saw him last, he was a top 15 wide receiver in the NFL for sure. Christian Kirk developed great chemistry with Trevor Lawrence in year one together. I think, a lot of people were memeing that contract, including myself, and he absolutely kind of proved everybody wrong, showed that he is a really solid wide receiver. You also have Zay Jones, who I thought was a really solid wide receiver 3, Jamal Agnew, Parker Washington. I just think this is a really good wide receiver room with a lot of upside with Ridley and Kirk and Zay Jones there. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to get the most out of him, so I really like what the Jaguars have done with their wide receivers. So that is going to be all of my wide receiver room rankings. Let me know what you think down below. Who did I put too high? Who did I put too low? I would truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button down below. Really trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the beginning of the 2023 NFL season, and if I could get your help in doing so, that would be so much appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I will catch you in the next one.